The world isn't collapsing everywhere, but in some places it's happening right now. Entire nations are running out of money, power, and trust. Streets are empty, governments are powerless, and people are doing whatever it takes just to survive. These aren't far-off disasters. They're happening in real time. From political implosions to full-blown economic freefall. Here are 10 countries collapsing faster than anyone expected and why it's happening right before our eyes. Number 1. Haiti. Haiti feels less like a country and more like a patchwork of armed fiefdoms. In 2025, gang networks have seized whole districts, cut supply lines, burned farms, and pushed hundreds of thousands from their homes. The state cannot reliably deliver policing, justice, or basic services. That vacuum makes everyday life a daily risk. Markets close early, hospitals run out of medicine, and people pay for private protection or flee. Politically, weak transitional arrangements and leadership turnover leave no clear path to elections or reconstruction. External missions try to help but can't replace functioning institutions. When survival becomes local and ad hoc, national cohesion unravels fast. Families split, rural food production collapses in places, and a sense of shared future disappears. This is a country where routine breakdowns stack up daily into systemic collapse. Number 2. Lebanon. Lebanon's crisis is a slow-burn collapse that suddenly feels like freefall. Years of banking failures, currency collapse, and public service decay eroded trust. Then political gridlock and regional pressure around armed groups made recovery politically impossible. Citizens who once relied on public electricity, hospitals, and stable wages now face intermittent services and soaring prices. Young professionals emigrate, draining the talent that could rebuild things. The state exists in name, but struggles to collect taxes or pay salaries. Creditors, donors, and foreign backers stall, while factions bicker. In that gap, parallel authorities and militias gain leverage, and everyday bargaining replaces institutional governance. If a nation's social contract is broken, people can't rely on courts, schools, or utilities. Collapse becomes more likely because rebuilding requires both money and political will, and Lebanon currently lacks both. Number 3. Sudan. After oscillating between hope and war, Sudan is trapped in multi-front violence, fractured command structures, and mass displacement. Armies, militias, and local commanders fight for resources and territory. Humanitarian access is limited. Crops are abandoned, and whole towns are hollowed out. When conflict keeps people from farming in markets, famine risk spikes quickly. Refugee flows strain neighboring countries and erode regional stability. Attempts at ceasefires keep collapsing because local spoilers profit from chaos. Internally, institutions that once mediated disputes are gone or co-opted. So violence becomes the de facto rule. That spiral, conflict that destroys livelihoods and governance, which then breeds more conflict, is the textbook path from crisis to state collapse. Number 4. Yemen. Yemen has been living inside a prolonged calamity where infrastructure, health systems, and coherent governance have been shredded. Years of war turned cities into ruins, pushed millions into displacement, and left supply chains fragile. Cholera, hunger, and lack of power compound the human cost. With competing authorities and external players shaping front lines, no single actor can restore nationwide services. The economy is fragmented. Currency plunges, customs revenues dry up, and the social safety nets that cushion shocks are gone. When people cannot access hospitals, clean water, or basic markets, society becomes less resilient. Localized rule by armed groups and survival economies then replace the idea of a cohesive state. Yemen's collapse is a slow, grinding implosion of social systems, rather than a single dramatic event. Number 5. Venezuela. What started as economic meltdown is now an institutional breakdown. Hyperinflation, widespread shortages, and mass emigration hollowed out public services. The state struggles to keep pensions, electricity, and healthcare functioning. For many, daily life is improvisation. Long lines for food, private generators for power, and remittances from family abroad as a lifeline. Political paralysis deepens the problem. Governance is personalized and fragmented. Corruption eats revenue, and trust in elections or courts is low. As millions leave, tax bases shrink and skilled labor disappears, making any recovery more expensive and slower. Instead of a sudden collapse, Venezuela exhibits a persistent erosion. Neighborhoods and institutions decay while criminality and informal economies expand to fill the gaps. Number 6. Somalia. Somalia lives with decades-old governance gaps amplified by climate shocks and insurgency. Central authority is weak, rival clans and regional administrations wrestle for control, and Al-Shabaab takes advantage of security vacuums. Recurrent droughts force pastoralists to migrate, collapsing local food systems and igniting localized conflict over scarce water and grazing land. Cities can feel like islands of order surrounded by lawless countryside. When rural economies fail, urban slums balloon and informal power brokers rise. International aid helps, but cannot substitute for long-term state capacity, courts, accountable police, and tax systems. Without them, the country's political and social fabric keeps fraying, and repeated shocks can push the whole system over a tipping point. Number 7. South Sudan. South Sudan's independence did not bring durable state building. Instead, it inherited intercommunal rivalry, weak institutions, and a politics of extraction. Oil revenues once funded the state, but volatility, corruption, and conflict mean those funds don't translate into stable services. Communal violence displaces communities, undermines agriculture, and erodes trust between groups that must cooperate to run markets and schools. Humanitarian indicators show persistent food insecurity and displacement. When the basic bargains between leaders and communities break down, localized violence becomes the norm and central governance recedes. Rebuilding here requires reconciliation and functioning local governance, both of which remain fragile. Number 8. Libya. Since 2011, Libya's fractured political landscape has produced competing administrations, militias, and a rentier economy dependent on oil. Control of ports and pipelines switches hands, which makes public revenue unpredictable and leaves budgets unpaid. Justice systems are weak and militias fill security roles, often extracting money and imposing order by force. That militarized economy discourages private investment and makes political compromise costly for armed actors who profit from disorder. Meanwhile, infrastructure crumbles because maintenance and salaries lapse. Ordinary Libyans tolerate a patchwork of security and service provision until a long-term governing coalition can be forged, which has proved elusive. Number 9. Afghanistan. After rapid political change, Afghanistan faces the near-total collapse of public services that were previously maintained with international support. Health clinics, schools, and local governance networks have lost funding. Unemployment and poverty have soared. Restrictions on rights, especially for women, combined with limited access to cash and rising food prices, push families into survival mode. The economy increasingly relies on informal, localized coping mechanisms. External aid is constrained by political considerations. When social mobility, basic education, and public health are impaired, the country's human capital erodes, and recovery becomes a generational challenge rather than a quick fix. Number 10. Myanmar. A coup-triggered cycle of violent repression and armed resistance has hollowed out Myanmar's institutions. Nationwide conflict, targeted attacks on infrastructure, and widespread displacement disrupt agriculture and industry. Sanctions and investment flight further starve the formal economy. Ethnic armed organizations expand influence where the central state retreats, creating a patchwork of competing authorities. With trust in centralized governance shattered and international engagement reduced, basic functions, courts, roads, cross-border trade, slow to a halt in many areas. The country risks long-term fragmentation unless political settlement and inclusive governance return. Some countries fall in silence, others collapse with chaos you can't ignore. The nations on this list may never return to what they once were, and some may disappear entirely. But one thing's certain, the map of the world is always changing, and the next big collapse might already be in motion. If you thought this was shocking, just wait until you see the hidden warning signs in countries you thought were safe. That's a story you can't afford to miss.